Hi all, this is Skate, and I'm back in a Foch 155. Now I know a lot of people dislike this tank, and I know a lot of people still prefer the tier 9 Foch. Personally, I bloody love this thing. It is damn fast for the weight on the thing. I compared it in the review or guide I did on this tank. I compared it to an E50M without a turret. The ramming potential on this thing is huge. It's heavy, but it's damn fast. On top of that, it's got better mobility than something like a T54. In a straight line anyway. When it comes to track traverse, that's where tank destroyers in general start to suffer a little bit. But this thing really is good fun. And I said the same thing in the last video. If you have not tried it yet, try it before passing judgment. It is a barrel of laughs, and as these replays will show, and it's not just these replays, it's every single game, you can absolutely floor it into people in this tank. And I don't just mean the ramming potential. You can actually drive head first towards things and feel quite confident about it. And of course, this thing received a buff along with its tier 9 Foch in update 4.7. Now that buff is more significant on the 155 than it is on the tier 9, and I'll explain why in a minute. But basically, both of these tanks, the tier 9 and the tier 10, had their rangefinder armor buffed from 60 to 180. Also, the side armor has gone from 50 to 75, and the rear armor has gone from 50 to 75. Now these buffs don't sound overly significant, but they are, because you can put more aggressive angle when you're angling at the front, and you don't have to worry about things pretty much auto-penetrating the side of your tank. So from heavies, and from medium tanks, and even some tank destroyers, you're going to be producing a lot more bounces because you can put more angle on it. Those weak spots on top are still weak spots, however. But as long as you're moving, they are still hard to hit. I say they're weak spots. That massive rangefinder's gone from 60 to 180. That's quite nice. Now, I mentioned this is more significant on this tank than it is on the tier 9 Foch. And the reason for that being is the roof on the 155, and this is something you can't see in game, in the game statistics. But the roof on the 155 has 50mm of armor. The roof on the tier 9 only has 30mm of armor. Now that's significant, because if you miss the rangefinder when you're shooting at the tier 9, you can go through the roof, and you're going to overmatch the roof actually, all day long in pretty much everything you come up against in that tank. In this thing, you won't. It's amazing how much difference just 20mm extra armor can make in that aspect, but it's also frustrating that you can't tell this from in the game. Because let's be fair, if this was more clear in the game, you could even balance that out in your playstyle. But that is a big difference between the tier 9 and the tier 10 in terms of armor. You can easily go through the roof on the other thing. You can't on this. And that's why this thing gets more bounces, and that's why this thing has more reliable armor. Go in training room and trial it. Obviously, when you're talking about 183s and Jaegeroos, yeah, they're still going to overmatch your roof, but to be fair, they're more than likely going to penetrate the rangefinder as well. Then try the same thing with the tier 9. Even try it with HE. You will be very surprised. So yeah, even though it's had an armor buff, nothing has changed since my previous video in terms of its playstyle. It plays exactly the same way. It should be played exactly the same way. The only difference now is I think it's more reliable, and you're going to produce more bounces on the side armor. And if you over-angle accidentally, you're potentially going to come away from it in a better circumstance, or there's more chance, there we go. As we're about to demonstrate against this AMX-50 autoloader in front of us. Now, he bounced one off the front of us. I'm angling up while trying to look what's going on behind me. He's fired 2 shots, and I'm not going to turn and address the tanks behind me until I know he's fired all 3. Turning early would have been foolish, because he then would have been guaranteed one into my side. Now that we know his clip is down though, we can turn around and put a nice big juicy HE shell into the side of that Type 61. And there's another tank which really wants a nice big juicy HE shell. If I can catch it anyway. The mobility in terms of accelerating towards it isn't really an issue. It's getting around this corner. But we are going to snap one into its butt, which means a nice big high damage roll. There is one other argument, actually, still. Obviously, the 268 Foch 155 debate. Obviously, AMX usually comes off worse when people debate them. To me, though, I genuinely prefer this tank. I think its armor's more reliable. Its mobility is certainly better. Again, in the previous video, I did compare the two in that aspect, and you could quite clearly see the 268 lagged behind in terms of mobility. And then again, remember, this thing has 8 tons weight on top of a 268. So 8 tons more with much better mobility, better power to weight ratio. Like I keep saying, it's fun for ramming. Now, I am a fan of the 268. The 268 has been nerfed recently. It's no longer OP. I'd say it's quite nicely balanced, actually. But it does still have 7 degrees of gun depression, where this has 5. It also has a slightly better accuracy, better penetration value, and it has only 200 more DPM nowadays. So in other words, the 268 gets the slightly better gun, and this thing gets the better mobility and the better armor profile. Now, some people are going to disagree with me on the armor profile arguments, but 268 armor is only great and only reliable if you are pointing directly at something. If you point slightly away from that something, then the left-hand side or the right-hand side of your tank, especially the lower areas, which is still IS-8, is easily penetratable. I must admit, I don't understand that argument. No disrespect is intended to anybody here, but at the end of the day, the hull setup on a 268 is an IS-8. And I've never heard anybody say, yeah, the armor profile on an IS-8 is insane. If you haven't seen my Object 268 video, I would say please go and watch it, because I break down the frontal armor, how to use it the best I can, my personal opinion on how I use it. Shows the weaknesses of the armor, shows the strengths, basically how to try and use it to your advantage if you're the driver, and if you're against it, you can see how to use it to your advantage. But generally speaking, and basing it purely off my opinions on both tanks, not because I'm biased towards this one, if you watch the 268 video, you'll see I am a big fan of the 268 as well as the Foch 155. It's just gameplay wise, I do prefer the Foch 155. I certainly perform better in the Foch 155. And if you are a 268 lover, I strongly recommend you try this one. Make your way up the line, which is a bit treacherous in places, but make your way up the line, give it a go. You won't be disappointed by it, especially now it's been buffed that little bit further. It's, well, jolly good fun. The playstyle in this thing is just so aggressive. Now, as I said, it is comparable to a 268, but I can play this more confidently, much more aggressively. And that's shown in one of the other statistics, is the average spot rate. The average spot rate for myself on this tank is higher, on this tank destroyer, is higher than any of my other tier 10 tank destroyers. My average spot rate on this is 1.57. Now that's not half bad for a tier 10 tank destroyer. As a comparative, my 268 is on 1.1. And in between them is the 263. So the YOLO wagon, I have a higher spot rate on this than I do in the YOLO wagon. And if we're looking at the global averages for the last 90 days, well, the average spot rate on this thing is 1 for all servers. The average spot rate for the 263, obviously known as a YOLO wagon for obvious reasons, has 1.04. So there's negligible differences between that. But both of those tanks have a way higher spot rate than any other tank destroyer. Well, I should clarify, any other tank destroyer at tier 10. Now I've gone on about the spot rates a little bit there, but the reason I'm referencing that so much, check out this bad shot. Oh, that's so embarrassing. Yeah, the reason I've gone on about the spot rates is quite simply because it shows, and it's only one indicator, but it's a good indicator of how aggressive you can push this thing, and how people do play this more aggressively than they do other tank destroyers. Now, one note on the gameplay at the moment, I know for a fact that Jaeger is going to penetrate me, he's looking down on my armor. However, all those tanks are on the corner. The second I went over that ridge, which by the way, can't get a lot of tank destroyers up there, just saying. And you don't see many up there for that matter. But by going around that way, I've taken one shot. I've only taken one shot, but by taking that one shot, it's allowed that Jaeger to turn around, point at me, and it means every single other tank around the corner could rush and finish him from the other side. And being as I had the hit points to justify taking that shot, I was quite happy to take the shot. And I still have enough potentially to bounce or deal with a shell from those other two tanks which are still alive. But with it in mind that they can kill me, because it is touch and go with the amount of hit points I've got. With that in mind, I'm going to play the more, well, tank destroyer route, but I'm doing it right at the very end of the battle. And we can obviously help out by putting one big shot into the side of the IS-7, but we're at a distance where we remain safe, while still helping the team. IS-7's very, very low health. I'm going to kind of clutch a HE shot into the guy now, and we do manage to get the kill. So on that one, we've got 2 kills. It's not a fantastic game, but it's still a good game. It was a fun game, and it was a nice example of how you can push aggressively and push up and support your mediums, or push in front of them like an idiot. I may have pushed it a bit too much with the T62A and up on the hill. I didn't realise there was other mediums behind. Fairly obvious, mediums usually roll in packs. However, I pushed a little bit too hard in that example. But it was still an interesting one I wanted to show. Another very, very key focus, which applies to all tank destroyers really, which are turretless. And I've said this probably 1,000 times in my video, and I will probably say it for every single video I do on a turretless tank destroyer. Keep hard cover near you. Yeah, this thing's mobile. It's got a decent track traverse, but you will still be out-traversed by full-speed medium tanks. But that's not something just to take into consideration with this. That's something to take into consideration with all tank destroyers which are turretless. And we are going past heavies here, but there's a French one, and they're known for their speed, but the mobility on this thing is fantastic. And we are going to push a little bit aggressively again. And I don't think this Leo PTA expects us to do that, because we've put a shot into him, and you can see he's waiting around for us to come round. We've got one in the side, but we bounce his shot, and we're gonna we're gonna squish him while coming off the ridge. And we've done a lot of damage to this guy. But to add insult to injury, RNG is going to give me an ammo rack. But again, it's the beauty of this thing. It's a tank destroyer, and a lot of people don't expect you to push that aggressively in these things. And I think the gameplay in this last video is going to be a perfect example of what I mean by you can just push aggressively as hell. And it's not just the fun factor you have to consider then, it's also the fact of you can get round a map surprisingly quickly in something which packs quite a nasty alpha. Now yeah, you can do that in a grill, however, you can't bounce shots in a grill. So you're driving something which is heavily armoured, something very fast, something very heavy, with a 640 alpha shot. It really screws things up. Now, I ignored that E100 on that one side there because I want to go and help my buddy over here with the Foch. And in doing so, he's distracted, we have the side of him, which means we can just put one in and finish him off. Now, I could have gone for the E100, and it may have made more logical sense. But my logic at that point was, do you know what, screw it. I'm going for the Foch. It's going to be more beneficial and advantageous to try and keep a team buddy alive. Also, going at the Foch from that angle, going at the E100 from where I was, my logic at the point in time was once the Foch has dealt with my tomb buddy, that guy down there, once the Foch dealt with him, he would have been on another side of me. So I would have had an E100 and a Foch to deal with at that point. So yeah, made sense to go for the Foch. And that IS-7 did manage to penetrate me. Now he has shot one, I'm going to come run down and try and get into a stronger position for me, which means close to this ridge using, well, not gun depression because I've only got 5 degrees, but at this sort of angle, my armour is heavily angled, and the entire front of this thing, even with his APCR, in that circumstance, would have been one great big ricochet. And then the very last area There is an E5 with his butt to us. It looks like he's sadly gone AFK. Maybe battery died, maybe had to run away. But the HE on this thing, well, gives us a nice 1000 damage shot to finish off the game. And I was quite surprised at this. We did reload in time to just get the last 200 hit points as well. Now sadly there was an AFK in that battle, and that can turn the tide in a game. But we did still have plenty of tanks left. And it was still a nice example of how aggressive you can push in this tank, which is why I included it in the video even with the AFK, because, well, the Foch is fun and you can play it crazily aggressive. But yeah, hope you've enjoyed the Foch 155 video. Title's a bit childish, but it also made me giggle, because I'm childish. And it's also probably what the Leopard PTA was thinking. It's like, oh, what the Foch is that? But yeah, thank you all for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.